My persuasive speech, use of the people. Good evening. My name is Jaquan Gold. Please save your questions till the end. Imagine this. You're a young soldier, United States Army. You're sitting in a DMV with your newborn and your spouse. You're there because you need to update your license as it's about to expire and you're trying to be a proactive citizen. After 2 long hours, you finally get up to the counter, present all the necessary paperwork, to include the proof of address of the house you're renting, all for the clerk to say, "Sorry, we can't help you." Why? Because you need parental consent. How frustrating is that? I know the scenario because it happened to me. When I was 17, I went into the military. By the time I went to the DMV, I had a house, spouse, and child. And yet, I still needed my mommy's permission to update my license. It happened to me. I know it happens to a lot of our young service members. And that brings me to my topic for today. I want to change the law to make it so all military personnel are considered to be over 21. I'll explain why it's an issue, how easy it is to implement, and how to look for an individual in the military as a whole. Let's begin by listing some things you can't do before the age of 18. Before the age of 18, you can't vote, which is especially problematic for our young service members, because that means they're not contributing to who their commander-in-chief will be. My scenario, not being able to update your license without parental consent. Also without parental consent, you can't get tattoos or piercings. If you're adopted, you can't opt in to find your biological parents. You can't change your name, nor can you make a will, because I shouldn't have to explain why that one is an issue while being in the military. Now let's list some things you can't do before 21. The big one everyone wants to talk about, not being able to drink, purchase, or consume alcohol. But we'll get into that one later. Besides that, you can't purchase a weapon. Since the end of 2019, you can't purchase tobacco. You can't rent a vehicle, which due to the nature of being in the military and having to move so often is an issue. And you're not entitled to the full minimum wage, which is an issue for our National Guard and Reservist members. Now, these are just a few things, and you might say, well, why does it matter? Or what makes someone, or if you're under 21, you're mature. And so I like to say, what is maturity? Is it age-driven, behavior-driven? How do you know when someone's really mature? By looking up several definition sources, I've come to the consensus that maturity is when you're fully developed. Now let me ask you this. Do you feel fully developed? If you say yes, I'd like to challenge that, because how can you be? If every day you're learning something new about yourself, your environment, and every aspect of your life. If you're at a constant rate of growth, when are you fully mature? When are you fully developed? And so how can you attach an age to that? And to lawmakers, if you are going to make a law based on the arbitrary subjective number on the age of adulthood, then there should be rules, regulations, and exceptions to those rules. Specifically speaking on our soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, and guard, who stand ready to defend this country, who are dedicated and loyal. Those service members who stand and have fought for their country and their rights and your liberties as well as mine. For how can you make an exception, or how can you not make an exception for those who put their lives on the line? How can you entrust a force to stand against all enemies, foreign and domestic, as it states in the oath of enlistment, when they need their mom's permission to book a hotel room or update their license? How can you trust someone to put their lives on the line for their country when that same country doesn't trust them enough to be responsible enough to purchase alcohol? And that brings me to my 2 slides. In this, you'll see a picture of 2 children wearing military uniforms. So this is how society sees our underage soldiers. They see them as weak, small children who are just playing games. When in reality, this is how we should see our soldiers. Adults who are strong, capable, warriors, heroes, and protectors. It's time we put respect on our young service members. Well, how will we implement this? After this, I will send out a petition for everyone to sign, and to move the bill forward, and it'll be just as simple as that. Well, how does it look for an individual? Well, the military is all about confidence. Confidence is how you progress. And this definitely affects a soldier's confidence. From example, 19-year-old myself, stationed at Fort Bragg, my leadership entrusted me to be in charge of a team consisting of 3 members, ages 18, 21, and 30. Mind you, I'm 19, yet I'm in charge of several other soldiers, including those who are older than me. Around the same time, my wife and I decided that we wanted to have some time to ourselves and booked a hotel room. My mom's friend happened to be in the area where we were trying to go. So she babysat our child, and we went to the hotel, and they told us that we couldn't check in because we weren't 21. So I had to call my mom's friend to walk 20 minutes from her apartment with our daughter to come check us into the hotel room that we purchased. Now, isn't that messed up? How can I be trusted to lead and deploy other soldiers, but I'm not trusted enough to stay in the hotel room that I bought? And on a broader scale, the military as a whole. I'm not sure how many of you know about the military suicide rate, but this is a graph done in a study in 2018 suicide rate for the military, done by the Suicide Prevention Office for veteran suicide rates per 100,000 by age group from 2005 to 2017. If you look at this dark blue line that goes up higher than any other line, that is our young service members. Our young service members are killing themselves at a higher rate than any other service member. And a common way to combat suicide is social interaction. Another thing tied to the military, whether we like it or not, is alcohol. But see, alcohol ostracizes soldiers from that social interaction. Young soldiers who are underage, who don't participate in social interaction, is because out of fear of being reprimanded or facing UCMJ action, and those who do participate, if they are caught, are actually reprimanded. And I know this isn't going to change everything, but if one policy saves even one life, then I believe it's worth it. And I'll end by saying this. It's time we put respect on our service members, young and old. Our young service members do just as much, if not more, than any other service member. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming. What are your questions? Time for our Q&A. Or whoever for your questions.
You mentioned in your speech that you think that all service members should be treated as if they're over the age of 21. But there is a fundamental difference between a 17-year-old and a 21-year-old. So why do you think a 17-year-old should have the same abilities as a 21-year-old with more experience?
That is a great question, asking why I believe that 17-year-olds should have the same privileges, right? So when you're 17, you have to have your parents sign your contract, and that should be the last parental consent you should ever have, because, sorry, not in the frame, because that last signature is signing away your childhood, bringing you to adulthood. Does that answer your question?
That does answer my question. I have another question.
Yes.
So you showed us a graph that has to do with the suicide rates in the military. How is that related to whether or not a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old is treated as a 21-year-old?
Understanding your question is saying that how is the suicide rate graph for the military as a whole affected in this idea of our young service members?
Yes.
So with that, it's just stating an overall suicide rate. So basically, our young service members in general, are always encouraged to have this social interaction. We always talk about it during our briefings and our after our evening formations, to encourage you to get out of the barracks and go and do things and be with other people. But at the same time, if you do a lot of those outside social interactions, especially for including people who are over 21, there is alcohol involved, whether it's in the barracks or outside of the barracks. And if there's been plenty of cases where if something does happen or does go wrong, not only uh, are you reprimanded for whatever action that took place, but you're also reprimanded because you knew that you weren't supposed to be in that area because there was alcohol involved. So at the same, it's kind of like a catch-22 where they're telling you to go and be active, but at the same time, you're going to be reprimanded for being active. And if you're in that constant state of fear, then that's why I say it's not a complete fix for any other mental health or any other instability going on within that person. But if that person does feel ostracized and has to stay within the confines of their room or whatever, or in the part of their bedroom or anything like that, and not be socially active, then that does take a part of it. Does that answer the question?
Okay, so are you saying that in order for young service members to be able to engage in social activities, it is necessary for them to be able to drink or to be able to be around and in the presence of alcohol, even if they're not drinking?
So is it necessary for them to drink or to just be around alcohol is what you're saying?
Right, because it seems that your argument seems to allude to the fact that in order to feel fully engaged in a social context, our young service members have to be able to be in the presence of alcohol. And if they're not, then that could have negative impact on their mental health.
Yes, I hear what you're saying about whether or not the difference between consumption and just being around. Well, if you're around alcohol, not everyone, but there are times, especially if it's what I'm pushing for it to be more socially acceptable to be around alcohol, you're definitely going to have a lot more peer pressure for you to drink alcohol, right? So it's saying like you're going to be around it. If you're going to be around it, be responsible with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yes. Another question.
So, what are you pushing for? Are you pushing for if you are 17 and serving, you should have all the capabilities that a 21-year-old has, or that you can't start serving until you're 21?
So what exactly am I for? Whether or not you should only be able to serve once you're 21, or if you are under 21, you get the same privileges. The second, that is the latter. The second one, I believe that if you are under 21 and serving, you should absolutely be having the privileges of someone who is over 21. And the reason being is because, like I said before, having to sign, if you're under 17 and your parents sign, that's signing away your childhood into adulthood. And also being in the military, the nature of the military itself instills discipline and professionalism. Whether or not everyone has it, right? Because people make the argument of, well, I know service members who aren't very mature, right? But those are the service members that end up getting kicked out, right? Those are the people in the military are always watching for those individuals who don't fit within the values of the military. And it's about those core military values, right? So because the military is an organization based on professionalism, then that is what I'm speaking about. When there's people, regular civilians don't have a basis for how they should act or appear or represent themselves. When you are in the military, you do, and that's why I believe that they should have those privileges and rights because of the responsibility placed upon them. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it answers it. I just don't know if I agree with it.
Fair enough. Any other questions, comments, feedback?
I have a question, Jay.
Yes.
So you mentioned the right to vote, and at 17, you are unable to vote. If you are in the military, particularly, you're unable to vote to participate in a process that determines your next commander in chief. So are you saying that 17-year-olds in the military